Okay, well, Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome, and good job managing to get here with the streets a little dicey today, so good work. If you, depending on where you saw the advertisement for the event, you might have thought I was talking about Revelstoke in 2016, but I'm not Steve Bender and I don't do predictions, so we'll stick with Revelstoke in 1916. At the beginning of the year, I like to look and see what was happening in the community 100 years ago. It's always fun to see the parallels. In the first issue, there was a profile of some of the members of the Provincial Cabinet, and one of them was Thomas Taylor, who's the man seen standing on the podium in this picture. This picture was taken a few years earlier in 1912 when they did the dedication for the opening of the turning of the sod for the Mount Revelstoke Road. And he was our member of Provincial Parliament, and he was the Minister of Public Works. And then that year, 1916, they also added in the Minister of the Railways as well. So he was that was a very important portfolio. He was from the Trout Lake area. He originally was born in Ontario in 1865 and had started to article with a law firm. I went to Winnipeg at the age of 20 and then followed the CPR construction across the country. And I came to BC in 1888 working for the CPR. He was working in 1889 in Donald as a mechanical and store department, and then was the manager of the CB Hume store here in Revelstoke and then in Trout Lake City. And he was quite active in the Trout Lake area as well. He had a lot of mining interests, and he was mining recorder and postmaster at Trout Lake. So he was MP for several years until he lost his seat earlier in a little bit later in 1916. In the municipal election of that year, Hector McKinnon won as the mayor. He was elected by a large majority over J.H. Lyons. And the large majority back then was 255 votes because there weren't that many registered voters. And it was only men, property owners, who were able to vote at that time. The aldermen were Alexander Hobson, J. Guy Barber, W.A. Smythe, S.G. Robbins, F.H. Bourne, and S. Needham. They were all local businessmen. And they did say that they referred to a lot of what they called plumping at the polls. That's where people were basically doing the strategic voting. So they were only voting for the candidates that they wanted to get in. And they said the women did not yet have the vote, but they noted that there was a lot of canvassing done by the ladies, so they were taking an interest in municipal affairs.
That's a picture of a volleyball team.
Yes, that's,
okay.
My photograph still now is matched up with my that volleyball team is coming up right now. So in January 15th, the newspaper noted the first games of volleyball were being played at the YMCA between the Bankers and the Undertakers. Oh. So the Undertakers were the captain. I'm guessing that the captain was probably one of the Housen family who owned the funeral parlor in town. But volleyball had really taken off at this time as one of the big sports. So this was a little later in the year when they had their tournament, and it was referred to as the Dent team who won the trophy. And the little plaque that he's holding, we actually have in our collection in the basement in our collection of artifacts. There were 2 typhoid deaths recorded early in January. A young married woman with 3 young children. They were living at Glacier, and she became sick with typhoid fever, was brought into the hospital and died. And another man named Gordon Laird, who was working as a machinist at the tunnel in Rogers Pass, also came down with typhoid fever, was also brought to town but then passed away. They didn't have an isolation hospital there for infectious cases, so they would have been just in the general hospital. It was not until the 1920s that they built up a little isolation hospital here. But they did have the Queen Victoria Hospital, which is where Cooper's is now. There was a big write-up in the newspaper about the Cano bakery, which had opened just the previous year, just late in 1915. This photograph we just acquired last year from members of the Cano family. One of Mr. Cano's daughters married Emile Colarch, and they lived in what people refer to as the Colarch House on 2nd Street until it was sold just a couple of years ago. One of the things that was donated was, or they allowed us to scan some of these original photographs. And this is an incredible photograph of the Cano Bakery. And this was located where the U-Brew is now. And they were, even though it had opened in 1915, they were so impressed that they'd already written a previous long article about it, and they wrote another long article about it in 1916. Said, way back in the early 90s, Mr. Dominic Cano, assisted by his capable and energetic wife, contracted to supply bread to all the section gangs operating between Revelstoke and the summit. Quite a contract, that, especially when the bread had to be baked in a small homemade oven. When the new bake shop on 3rd Street was completed last month, Mr. Cano saw the completion of an ambition he has cherished for years. The building was 24 by 54 feet with cement blocks manufactured by Mr. Pratolini. He said, the wonderful floor, which draws exclamations of astonishment from all visitors, is made of chipped marble embedded in cement. No dust, grease, oil, or grime can lodge on a smooth, polished, mirror-like surface, thus assuring perfect floor sanitation. The high walls are of snow-white hard plaster, the ceiling of polished metal. The long kneading trough, the molding tables, drawers, trays, trucks, etc. are all of white hardwood. But the chief attraction of this big spotless bake shop is the oven, which almost fills the far end of the room. Shiny white tiles cover the front wall. 2 big doors, which swing upward at a touch, admit the bread. Between the doors is set a thermometer and electric lighting arrangement, which reveals every corner of the interior and shows the bread in the process of cooking. Pan loaves at the back, single loaves in the middle, and here at the very front, the delicious French loaves, odd in shape, each acquiring its peculiar nut-like flavor by being baked on the bare hot bricks. So it makes you want to go have a nice fresh loaf of bread. In February, there was a note that the telephone line was completed to Kamloops, and it said Revelstoke was now connected with Taft, Craigellachie, Solsquaw, Malaqua, Sicamous, Mara, Enderby, and Kamloops. And that so to call from any point between Revelstoke and Salmon Arm was 40 cents for 2 minutes, and each additional 10 minutes was 10 cents. And between Salmon Arm and Kamloops, it was 60 cents for 2 minutes, and each additional 10 minutes were 15 cents. And the exchange was run by the local telephone company, which had been started by William Cowan back in 1890s. Also that year, the high school girls formed the basketball league, and so far I've just found 2 of the team names, and that would be the Boneheads and the Prunes.
Cathy, that building was probably demolished then in the bakery?
I don't really know. I'd have to, I don't know how that compares with what's there now.
Yeah, I'm just wondering
I
about
think
the
it's,
floor and
yeah.
Strange looking building.
We'll have to do a bit of,
everything. Snooping.
yeah, like exactly.
That's
I'll give you that project. You're good at that. So one of the big news for 1916 was the second Winter Sports Carnival. The Revelstoke Ski Club had been formally organized in 1914, and they held their first Winter Carnival in 1915, but they didn't have time to get permission to use National Park land, So they held their first jump on just a rise of land at the base of Mount Revelstoke outside of the park boundaries. But shortly after the first carnival, they started having conversations with the National Park Service and decided that they found this beautiful spot for a jump on Mount Revelstoke. And they worked with the Park Service to get the land ready for the jump. They put in the stonework and the cribbing, built the judges' tower. And so I think it was February 8th and 9th, they held their first jumping event on Mount Revelstoke, and jumping continued at that site until 1975. And we're all going to want to go up there next spring and see the beautiful new structure that's been put in place by our very own Rob Buchanan, referred to as Nell's Knickers. And you're all going to have a chance to stand at the in-run and lean into these beautiful steel knickers, and lean over and get the same sensation that the jumpers would have had when they stood up there, except that you're not going to have to plummet off the hill. So here's Nell Nelson jumping at that spot back in 1916, and he broke the Canadian record with that jump, but he was a little disappointed. He said he was using new skis, and he also had an injury to his foot, and the snow conditions weren't that good. He said the snow was a little bit too soft at the time, so he did a jump of 136 standing feet, and did another jump of 152, but just very lightly touched down. So he was disappointed with his result, but he still ended up as a Canadian champion with that jump. The newspaper said, as one looked below from the dizzy height of the judges' stand and took in the panoramic background of peaks, rivers, and valleys, and dwelt on the noble proportions of the hill itself, and its 600 feet of runaway, black with strings of people on foot and in vehicles, and came back to focus on the jump itself with the Union Jack draping its fierce takeoff. The scene was altogether worthy of a battle between giants. They had a doctor and nurse on site with a special rig equipped with a Red Cross flag to fly to give it right of the way to the hospital, but luckily it wasn't required at that event. The newspaper went on to say, surely the greatest satisfaction and interest to Revelstoke is the fact that in the great jumping contest, Nell Nelson of Revelstoke not only retains as champion of British Columbia, but is now also champion of Canada as well. And there's one of the other jumping events. This was Tom Maley. You can see him just a little bit farther down the hill on his jump there. He would have been jumping in a B event. He's a teenager still at the time. And there's Tom Maley in the 7 mile race. There were two competitors in the B event, Tom and his twin brother Len. And I thought it was Tom who won, but it was actually Len who won the 7 mile race. So the twins had a fierce competition. Some of the skiers and observers. And this was the start of the 7 mile race, which started and ended at the hospital. As you can see, everybody but this man on the end are wearing Revelstoke Ski Club sweaters. This is Nell Nelson right here, and the two Maley brothers. And then the man on the end is the man who won the race. His name was Ole Ivinson of Camrose, and he took the championship of BC with his race. So the record of 58 minutes over such a grueling course, his splendid stride, powerful graceful action, and full-winded spirited finish was well worthy of the hearty reception he received on crossing the tape. Now, several years ago, I had a visit from a man who was the son of Ole Ivinson, and he told me that it was only very recently that he had discovered that his father had been a champion skier, because his father gave up the sport entirely after a few years. I guess he became very religious and decided that sports was frivolous, and didn't participate in sports after that time. But he was a champion ski racer. He competed here and in other parts of BC and Alberta until he gave it up. And his son was in his 80s before he had discovered that his father had been a ski champion. So we was able to give him copies of the newspaper articles and photograph.
And you said it started and stopped at the hospital, and that's where Cooper's is now?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly where the route went. I think it's maybe in one of the other issues, but I didn't write that out here. They also had two ladies ski races, ladies ski run with no poles. The winner of that was Nell Nelson, who is the mother of Lola Turnross, Lola Gallicano. And the ladies open ski race of 2 miles was won by this woman, Mrs. Gunnarsson. And she was quite a force to be reckoned with in the women's ski racing scene. She was a champion in BC and Alberta for several years. And they said that even if she gave the other women a block or 2 head start, she'd still beat them. And one time she raced against the teenage boys, and she gave them a head start, and she beat them all. The Gunnarsson was one of the real prominent ski families in town. Her husband made a lot of the local skis, and we have some Gunnarsson skis in our collection. And their 4 sons were all competitive skiers. Gunnar Gunnarsson was expected to be another ski champion, but he died during World War II. Sorry, Hans Gunnarsson. At the end of the ski competition, they had a carnival in a masquerade ball in the Opera House, and it was decorated in patriotic colors, because of course this was during the First World War, so everything was done in a patriotic theme. They had a 5-piece orchestra. They said by 10 o'clock the crowd was so great that not even standing room was available, and they awarded the prizes at the ball. Also during the ski event, the CPR had brought in their special press representative, F.T. Troutman, to be present at the tournament, and he was doing accounts, articles, and photographs that were to be published in all of the leading newspapers as well as the CPR pamphlets. So they were giving the tournament quite a bit of publicity. Around this time there was a scam going on, and of course scams have been around forever. This one actually kind of sounds familiar to the kind of scams that happen now. It says, it appears that a firm in the East is circulating letters to different parties in Revelstoke stating that they have won a prize in some fictitious lottery and asking them to remit a certain sum of money when they would send them the prize. The following is a copy of a reply written by a Revelstoke schoolboy, which we consider worth producing. Dear sirs, I am sorry to say that you are mistaken in the prize you offered me. I have never done any work to win this prize. The silver set that you offered me for 97 cents is not worth 10 cents. Therefore, it is no use of me to send you 97 cents for a tin set, which you call a silverware set. I can win a prize up on the mountain in ski jumping worth $4. So we shut that scam down. In early March of 1916, there was a fire on Mackenzie Avenue, and one of the buildings that it destroyed was this building, the Taylor Block. It was built in 1898. This is a photograph of it shortly after it was built. It was in 1899. The house next to it was later moved, or there were 2 houses next to it. They were later moved to make room for business blocks, so they weren't there at the time of the fire. But you can see it's a fairly large building, and there were always at least 2 businesses located in there. Sometimes, I think there was actually photographers on the second floor as well.
Where was it on
This was right where Chubby Funsters is now. So in the 1920s, the building that's now Chubby Funsters was built for the CP telegraph office. And, but that was still, that's the location where it was, so right in Grizzly Plaza. It was, building was built by T.E.L. Taylor, who was a local businessman. There's a picture of T.E.L. Taylor in front of the building that's still there. And then this is the building that was this was the Oyster and Chop House. And there'd been a fire in 1914. You can see that there's nothing at that end. So those buildings went up in the 1914 fire. These two buildings went up in the 1916 fire. And this one stayed. It survived two fires on either side of it. It was built, it was the Oyster and Chop House. It was a Chinese restaurant. And it was finally torn down in later years. And the health clinic was built there, and the building at the Avalanche Center just vacated. There was, before I get to that, there was a swimming gala held in the YMCA. The swimming gala. Yeah, because the YMCA was built, and it was built where the city parking lot is now, across from the block where the bowling alley is. So that where that big parking lot is, that was the YMCA. It was built by with a lot of the money came from the CPR, because they felt that they were willing to invest money in providing healthy activities for their especially for their single young men, because there were a lot of other unhealthy alternatives available for single young men in town. So, but it had a full gymnasium, it had bowling alleys, it had some rooms, a library, and it also had a swimming pool, or actually referred to it as a swimming tank. And so it's not a large pool, but they did hold a swimming exhibition there. A man named Arthur Bennett showed some of the strokes, including the dog paddle, the beginner's crawl, and the distance crawl. And some of the boys did a exhibition of fancy diving, which would have been a little tricky because it wasn't a deep pool, maybe 6 feet. And they also did land and water drills by the Royal Life Saving Society, and had swimming races. Another fire in May, the Climax House Hotel and Restaurant burned down. And this was located where Remax Realty is now, right on 1st Street at the corner of Campbell, right across from Style Trend. You can see I was actually quite happy to find this photograph, because I had another photograph, this one, showing the side of the building looking this way up 1st Street. And you don't really get a sense of the building itself. But with this one, I knew that we had a photograph showing this parade group on 1st Street, but I'd never really looked too much at the back end of the photo. When I had a look at it, I could see the sign for Hotel Climax, so I just cropped the photo to show the hotel area.
Is it the beach roof and the flat roof?
Yes, yes. That's all the, so this was probably the hotel area, and then the restaurant there. They also had a bar in there. That's the reason where most people would open a hotel so that they could have a bar. Certainly in the early days, that's how you could get a liquor license, was to open a hotel. It had a rather seedy reputation. There was at least one man who died there, and it was treated as a murder case, but because he had died after being in a fight with another patron, and then there was incidents. There was it appeared that he had died as the result of a blow, but he'd been roughed up by a couple of people, and they couldn't prove who had done it. One of the proprietors of the hotel was under suspicion as well, but they just didn't have enough evidence to continue with charges for anybody. But they also had the reputation for rolling their clients. That's where they'd get them drunk and take their money and toss them out the back door, or give them to a hack or taxi driver, and then the taxi driver would steal their money and give a cut to the hotel. So didn't have the best reputation. There was a story of the Salvation Army campaigning outside the hotel one day and singing their songs, and the proprietor came out with a hose and got rid of them.
So did it take like the whole block, like what used to be the visitor center or
It went, it didn't go all the way back to the corner. There was a warehouse behind there as well, where the Warren company that built the Style Trend building, they had a warehouse behind there. And there was a note in the newspaper that said said 2 hours after the fire broke out, nothing was left but part of the walls and a few embers. Severe heat set fire to a telegraph pole across the street and broke the plate glass windows in Warren Brothers store, and that's the Style Trend. So the Warren Brothers warehouse, situated just back of the hotel, also narrowly escaped being destroyed. That T. Gibson, employed in the hotel by Mr. Corning, was awakened by the smoke and attempted to leave the building by the stairs, but was driven back by smoke and flames. He finally had to drop from a window, being assisted by Constable Garnett, the local police officers. So that was the end of the Climax Hotel. It had been built in 1892, so it was one of the earlier buildings in the upper part of town. The Connaught Tunnel was under construction at that time, and every year of construction there was at least a couple of deaths reported. In May there was a young man named Furby Pettipiece who died when a steam shovel that was operated by his uncle overturned on top of him. 3 days later, his uncle, another uncle, Earl Pettipiece, died in a battle for Mount Sorel. Another fatal accident happened just a few weeks after that, when a young man, Alonzo DuPont, aged 19, fell under a moving train. And Alonzo DuPont was the nephew of Ed Corning, who owned the Climax Hotel. So it was a blow for that family too. In June, the Women's Canadian Club brought in Amelia Pankhurst as their special guest speaker. She was a well-known suffragette from England, and she was speaking on the ideals of national service. Also in June, the police commissioners appointed John Cleland as their chief of police. He had joined the local force in 1907, and Revelstoke had its own police force from incorporation in 1899 up until 1932. In May, a group of local skiers went to the top of Mount Revelstoke, and they had their own little informal ski competition at the top of the mountain. Nell Nelson was part of the group, and his younger brother, Ivan Nelson, and they were encouraging a little jump off between a couple of the younger boys, Ivan and another younger boy. And this is the top of the Balsam Lake Chalet, which is the first chalet built at Balsam Lake. There's the doorway, and there's the stovepipe. So they're on top of it in May. The Duke of Connaught came out west that year. The Duke of Connaught was one of the sons of Queen Victoria, and he was the Governor General of Canada at the time. Of course, whenever he was traveling across Canada, he'd be asked to perform duties here, viceregal duties. So one of them was to go up Mount Revelstoke as far as the road was completed at that time, and unveil or plant a post. That was on July 28th. They went up to the elevation of 3,921 feet. Their party was met at the station, and after a presentation of flowers by the ladies of Revelstoke, the party entered the waiting automobiles and were taken up the automobile road to the end of construction, where His Royal Highness planted a post. They went down the hill to the former internment camp buildings, which were still in place, and were entertained by the men working on the road. They were served tea. Back at the station, the Duke inspected the boys' cadets corps and Boy Scouts, and one of the scouts presented him with a basket of trout. The Connacht Tunnel had been under construction since 1913, and by July that was nearing completion, they only had a few thousand feet left to complete, and then there was the job of lining the tunnel. A week previous, when the Duke of Connaught was going through on his earlier trip, he was asked to christen the tunnel. So they arranged for what was referred to as the flagged flat car propelled by a dumpy little double-cylinder compressed air engine, which took the party through the tunnel, which would have been a little scary at the time. As I say, it wasn't fully completed. They hadn't finished lining the tunnel all the way through. And at the east end, they had a table with several bronze-colored, suspicious-looking bottles, as the writer said. This writer, I think, sort of fancied himself a bit of a novelist. I've read a lot of flowery stuff. This is way up there in terms of flowery prose. The Duke gave a brief speech, and then the writer said, "Then seizing one of the suspicious-looking bottles by the neck, he flung it violently against the jaw of the tunnel, which promptly foamed at the lips. I christen thee Selkirk Tunnel," cried the Duke in ringing tones. Hip hip hurrah rang up the gorge of the valley and sank flatly into the black oblivion of the tunnel as the spectators emphasized the Duke's action. You want to read the whole thing, it's quite a bit.
Selkirk Tunnel.
They called it the Selkirk Tunnel, but by the time they had opened it, it was fully open to the public on December 16th of 1916, and they were referring to it as the Connaught Tunnel then. But I guess the Duke didn't want to name it after himself. But he christened it the Selkirk Tunnel, which I found interesting too. There's another photograph of work trained during the construction of the tunnel.
So the Duke could go all the way through the tunnel, Cathy?
Yes.
Actually get, okay.
Yes, they took it all the way through. I'm not sure where I'm at with photos here. Oh, get that one, yeah. A provincial election was held in September. Our local MLA, Thomas Taylor, was upset by Dr. Sutherland, who was a popular local doctor. They also voted for prohibition in the district, and that vote was approved. And they voted for women's suffrage locally in municipal elections. Provincial suffrage wasn't enacted until later in 1917. But that meant that women could now vote in municipal elections. In September, another fire, the Star Theatre and the former house and block were destroyed by fire. Said that flames shot up so far that for blocks it was as light as day. And that the house and block had been built in 1892 by Robert Housen, who had a furniture store, and he was also the local undertaker. And a little later he built what's now known as the house and block, the next block on Mackenzie Avenue. This is just showing where the house and block was. This is a photograph of Mackenzie Avenue about 1903. So there's Mackenzie, and this is Victoria Road, and there's the crossing. So you can see there were, before 1914, there were buildings right out to Victoria Road on both sides. There was a little building that was being used as a theatre right on the end, the Star Theatre. So the Star Theatre and the house and block went up in this 1916 fire. There's another view showing the end. It's a really great photo from about 1908. But you can see there's Victoria Road, and you can see the buildings along that side. This is the Taylor block that burned down in 1916. And then this is a house and block and the Star Theatre that burned down in the September fire. There's some interesting other things in this photograph. That's the little house at the bottom of, just at the corner of Connaught and 3rd where Mr. Augustine lives. See, it was already there in that 1908 photo. In October, there was a group that was formed called, because the women were able to vote in municipal elections, and they decided that they should have an organization where they could meet and learn more about municipal issues. So they formed a women's forum, and they had a meeting in the city hall led by a man named Mr. W.B. Ferris, who gave them a talk on what their rights and duties were as voters. And here's some of what he had to say. Women are the homemakers. They must direct their attention in public affairs into such channels as will result in benefit to the home. Women's first interest and duty is in connection with the home. He says that a few times. It's cleanliness, cheerfulness, and healthfulness. Next to the home comes the neighbors, and the still wider view embraces the city and its relation to the home, such as sanitation, food supplies, etc. Often these things need regulating by civic authority, and here the votes of the citizens enforce their requests. Women must therefore thoroughly understand their city and its needs. Now here's where he goes on to make a pitch for local buying. And you wouldn't think that people were buying out of town in 1916, but apparently there was a big trade in mail order goods. So he goes on to say, women are not always the wage earners of the home, but they form 10% of the buyers. It is very desirable, therefore, that women should spend the family income with intelligence. And in this connection, too little thought is given to the welfare of the hometown. Here in Revelstoke, not less than $10,000 every month is sent out of the city by women for dry goods and even for groceries and other household supplies. If that was true, that's a lot of money in 1916, $10,000 a month. So there should be a meeting of the buyers of this town with the Merchants Association to determine how this drain upon our city's dollars should be reduced. So Mr. Ferris had a bit of an agenda with this meeting. But there's quite a few other articles in the papers around that time talking about buying local and why it's important to buy local. So it's interesting that that was an issue 100 years ago as well. A really cute little story. There was one of the aldermen, Alderman Smythe, seemed to be rather an argumentative fellow, and he was always bringing up issues with the city council. They had a long-standing run-in about some of the property that he owned. By the sounds of it, they might not have had really good conflict of interest legislation back then. But there was at one council meeting, he made charges against the public works employee that they were stealing planks out of the old sidewalks and taking them home. And so at this next meeting, this Alderman Lundell, who was not Alderman Lundell, A.F. Lundell, who was the public works foreman, attended with W. Morris, one of his employees. Lundell said, "I've come here to reply to the charges made against me of stealing lumber and planks that were worth taking. The planks we take out, I would be ashamed to offer to anyone, even as a present. If you offered them to most people, they would be insulted. Any that were of any use at all, I split and used as 2x4s. Most of the planks have been in the sidewalk since the city was incorporated. The team has been around 3 times this year gathering planks to get them out of the way. At the rate we've been taking them out, it would take a teamster and team half a day to gather up planks not worth 50 cents. I have always been respected. There are 2 names I refuse to let anyone call me, and they are a thief and a liar. My record and character are above reproach, and you gentlemen can all bear that out. I have never taken 1 stick of wood." And one of the employees is Mr. Morris, who had taken less than half a load of wood. It was just complete garbage wood that he'd taken, and basically to get it out of the way. He said, it is still there and Alderman Smythe can have it back if he wants it. Then there was a lot of back and forth about, because Smythe was still wanting to flog this issue. And he was accusing one of the other aldermen of having made a motion that the Alderman Bourne hadn't made. And Alderman Bourne says to the mayor, will you call that man to order, your worship? So finally they get that settled, and Alderman Needham says, you cannot exonerate from people doing a thing they never did. So they were debating about whether they should have a motion exonerating the men. And finally Alderman Needham moved that the explanation of the men be accepted and that the matter be dropped. The motion was carried, but Alderman Smythe voted against it. So we've just got a few more slides that we can look at to close up the top. This was another one showing where some of the burned out buildings had been on the block. That was the earlier buildings that had burned down in 1914. And you can see by this time they put up some billboards around there, because that's where the grizzly bears are now in the parking lot on the Regent side. And that's the Oyster and Chop House. And then where the Taylor block used to be.
It's amazing how fast the trees grew.
Yeah. And that was the completed Connaught Tunnel, Western Portal. An amazing feat of work. It took more than took 3 years of construction. As I said, there were several deaths that occurred during that. There were lawsuits, you name it. Of course, there was a lot of involvement with the First World War was still raging in Europe, and a lot of news throughout the year about the First World War. In all, more than 100 men from Revelstoke died in World War I. 27 of them died in 1916. 9 of them died at the Battle of Mount Sorel in June of 1916. 6 men from Revelstoke died on one day, on June 3rd, 1916. And then another 17 died in the battle for the campaign, the Somme campaign in the fall of 1916. This is a photograph of some of the bridge guards. This man was John Kaylor, who died in 1917 at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And he was the brother of Bruno Kaylor, who some people will still remember, lived on 4th Street until he lived to the age of 101. That was one of the Maley brothers before he went overseas. He was quite short. He was under the regulation height, but they ended up creating a unit called the Bantam Unit for men under 5'3". So he was part of the Bantam Unit. A lot of the Bantam men were used as tunnelers. His older brother Jack was one of the Revelstoke's casualties. There's another man who also died, George Soames. The YMCA also had classes for women, so this was one of the women's ladies' classes in 1916 in the really cute little uniforms. Those would have been the bloomer style pants that they were wearing. And the high school cadets, that they had been formed in 1915 at the high school with the boys. And we do have the names of all the boys in our records. This is showing the road up to Arrow Heights. It was known as Morans Hill back then, and it was, the Morans were a family that had a farm at the base of the hill, close to where the bridge goes across. And the Illisilloit Power Dam, or power plant for the dam on the Illisilloit around 1916. That's just beyond where the industrial park is now.
Is that where Powerhouse Road went to?
Yes. Yeah, that's why it's named Powerhouse Road. Now, if you follow our Facebook page, I put these 2 photos up last night to show the snowplows on Mackenzie Avenue around 1915, 1916, around that time. But this is the corner of First and Mackenzie, so this is where the clinic is now, and the little clothing store, and that's where the Royal Bank is now. This building is was Lawrence Hardware, it's now the Roxy Theatre. And there's the other side of the street. That building is still there. That's where the CIBC is now. That was the original Imperial Bank that was torn down to make way for the CIBC. So the jewelry store was built there in 1904, and it remained as a jewelry store until about 1980. Ken's father owned it for several years, and then where Taco Club is now was the C.R. McDonald's drugstore.
What does it say in the middle below Diamond Hall?
Silverware.
Oh,
Silverware, watches, clocks, jewelry, and the other, that word I can't read, it's covered by snow. This is a couple of photographs taken at Arrowhead in that area in 1916. This was a man named G. McGagran, who had a dog team and did a mail run between Arrowhead and Beaton. And usually they probably would have done the mail run by boat, but in the winter he was probably able to go across the ice. And another photograph of Arrowhead around 1916. That's one of the sawmills. That was about it. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Well, it's a little bit of what was happening 100 years ago.
I just wanted to say one thing about the Connaught Tunnel, and I noticed like in those days when they built this double track, and now of course it's single track, and having a history there. But they used to say in the old days with the steam engines and those fan houses that it shows on the west portal, I don't think they were used right off the bat. But anyway, the long and the short of it is, the tunnel would be so full of smoke when they went through, they'd open the window and stick the broom out against the wall to see if they were still moving.
Wow.
Because, you know, with the railroad, they had an expression, what is it, tonnage first, safety last, you know, kind of a thing. But it was so dark in there, you couldn't see that you were moving.
Wow.
So anyway, that was just a little.
That's an amazing story. Any other stories? Comments, questions? No, I don't know. I'll have to, because the Gala family was continuing to run the bakery until the 1980s, but I'm not sure whether it was whether they'd replaced the building or replaced it. I'll probably need to talk to the family to see if they have any information on that.
Boy, the floor of that place would be.
That sounds astounding, isn't it? That description.
Cathy, why was it called a sanitary bakery?
I
And
think-
why were there no windows?
So thieves
Yeah.
don't break in.
Well, sanitary, I think because they were really, with the floor that they had put in, I think they were really trying to emphasize that aspect of it, that it was completely clean. And because I think the bakeries had the reputation of, because everything was made out of wood back then, so grease and everything. So I think they were really emphasizing that, the cleanliness.
Okay. How about the lack of windows? Just
That I don't know.
history?
Maybe it was just the front.
So you've
Yeah,
got
'cause
heat.
we couldn't see the side of the building, so I'm not sure if,
They have big doors.
Were there more pictures of it, Cathy, from the Pollard family?
no, actually, this was the only one that I've seen.
And the Gala Tunnel
Boy,
still
it'd be
have
hot in there
anything?
in July or August.
That's kind of weird.
No, the Gallicanos in town didn't even have this picture. It came from sort of another branch.
You see, there could have been
Pollard
windows on
branch.
the side.
Yeah, you can't tell what's on the side from that. It's just a straight
Oh,
on.
Oh, there's stairs on the side?
Stairs
Oh,
inside,
yeah, there's
stairs
stairs.
inside.
Yeah, you can see stairs right there.
Didn't they mention specifically something about the doors? And it may not be that these are the doors they're talking about.
The oven doors, they were talking
They're
about.
talking about the oven
Yes,
doors,
right, right,
you know.
right, right.
But you can see they've got double doors there at the front.
Pretty crude.
So
Like they have
pretty.
chicken wings.
And that's Mr. Gallicano. There he's a distinguished looking gentleman. It's probably one of his daughters.
Big dog house. The left there. That's what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and a chicken run there by the looks of it.
And you said this is where Begbie Brewery is right now?
No.
You brew.
You brew.
The U-Brew
Oh, the
and the
U-Brew.
water stand.
Oh, okay, mixed up.
On the end of Second Street. He's
Oh, there, okay.